Chapter 91. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 91, Bonus Chapter, Chapter 91. A room we could go. Kevin, I understand that you're angry, but you shouldn't have done that to your mother. She's the queen of this land. Lexa said as she stopped Kevin just outside the library. Kevin puffed and looked into Lexa's eyes. If you're going to be lecturing me about my decisions, then stay away from me. All my life I thought my mother was dead and my dad was the wizard who had to live in the forest because I was human, but surprisingly I had a mother. She was alive and living a luxurious life in the city while her son was stuck with some wizard in a forest for a whole 16 years. How do you call that fair? Kevin turned his face away as he pulled the hair of his head. Lexa could feel the anger in Kevin's tone, but she was trying her best to make him cool down his anger. I know you're angry, Kevin, but you should try and calm down. It's not your mother's fault that you were taken to the forest, neither was it the wizard's fault. Then whose fault is it? Mine. He asked as he leaned on the wall outside the library. It's all because of the stupid rules that the elf leaders made because of their hatred for humans. But you, Kevin, are here to change it. If you get to know these humans well, you'll know that they are not bad people. At least from the comic books and movies I watched, I discovered that those people are just like we fairies and elves. We all want to be superior over other creatures. But, what the wizard did was wrong. He should have at least told me what happened. I would understand and try to stay calm. His decision of not telling me about my mother and father earlier was bad. Lexa moved closer to him and unexpectedly, Kevin felt her lips crushed on his. Instead of complaining, you should be grateful for all that you have, Lexa said after kissing him. You are a Triling, a hero from a myth. The son of the queen, is likely to become the next king. A handsome and romantic guy every lady would wish to have. And lastly, you are the husband to a pretty fairy like me. Kevin chuckled softly after listening to Lexa's words. Tell me you want your reward so badly. He said. I want it badly, but the problem is, I'm worried about where we would stay. Females are not allowed to enter the male dorm room and you know that. Or do you have an idea of where we could go? Lexa asked. I can provide you with a bed in the shadow space if you want. The system said. For once, I'm agreeing with you. Can you please do that? Kevin said to the system. It's already done. Everything you need has been provided, including the electricity and electronics you said you wanted in the shadow space. I'm sure you're going to like it. Said the A1 system. Wow, that's fast. For the record, thank you, system. Don't bother. I'm a kind of bribing you. Bribing me for what? I want you to forgive your mother. It is not her fault but your father's fault. He left her all alone because of his selfish desires. You know what, just ignore me and go have a lovely time with your wife. The system said, trying not to reveal too much information to Kevin yet. But the system didn't realize that the more he kept on saying this, the more Kevin's curiosity grew. Then you'll have to promise me that you'll tell me all about it once I'm back. Don't give any excuses again, huh? Kevin said. Okay, I promise. I'll tell you. Afterward, Kevin and Lexa disappeared and appeared inside the shadow void space. Well, it shouldn't be called shadow void space but rather shadow palace room. The shadow space that was once empty and void of anything had suddenly transformed into a beautiful palace. There were walls and paintings in the palace and a single throne stood on a raised platform. There were also doors on the side of the throne room leading to different places in the palace. Wow! This is magnificent. Is this the shadow void you're telling me about? It is so beautiful. Lexa exclaimed as she walked around the palace with excitement. Yep, but it's not always as beautiful as this. It's just a bribe from the system anyway. Once we're done and have left, it will turn back to its real form, a shadow void. So don't get your hopes high, it's not going to be like this forever. Same for each person's beauty, they tend to get ugly when I grow old. It doesn't matter as long as it doesn't change to an empty space while we're here. And wait, when did you become a motivational speaker all of a sudden? You should try motivating yourself with those speeches of yours, angry guy. Lexa teased as she walked towards the raised platform that had a throne placed on it. Kevin could only laugh at her words as he approached one of the doors. I found a room we could stay, Kevin said as he opened one of the doors leading into a room with blue-red bulb light shining from the ceiling. A room. Lexa immediately rushed towards Kevin, and as soon as she entered the room, Kevin shut the door behind them. This must be the bedroom. Lexa asked. Literally, it's our bedroom. So, do you want your reward or not? Kevin had his arms crossed on each other. I can't wait to have it. Lexa wrapped herself around him and the two started kissing passionately. Kevin carried Lexa while they kept on kissing and then dropped her on the bed. Removing his shirt, Kevin climbed on the bed towards Lexa and started moving his hands over her lap. You have soft skin, wifey. Kevin grinned to himself as he proceeded on using his tongue to lick her two laps. Are you ready to receive your reward, wife? Thanks for unlocking the privilege, I'm really impressed. Chapter 92. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 92. Chapter 92. Till you moan for me. The moment Kevin's hand touched the surface of her skin, Lexa's heart thudded hard. Her body became stiff as she bit hard on the inside of her lower lip. With his hands, he made them run across Lexa's lap ever so softly, as if her lap was some precious and fragile skin that he was afraid to damage. He then changed his course as he brought his head closer to her laps and started licking the surface of her skin with his tongue. Lexa brought her gaze downwards to glance at Kevin. She could see his long eyelashes gazing back at her. She kept on gazing at him that she couldn't seem to tear her eyes off him, not that she wanted to. And that thought shocked her more than her inability to stop staring at him. He was just so tempting to her. The little devils at her shoulders were whispering to her to just stay back and enjoy the feel of her husband's tongue against her skin. The feeling was unbelievably soothing, she felt like she was dreaming. It was the first time she would be feeling this way. His tongue that brushed on her skin halted and a slow smile curved on his lips. He caught his lower lip between his white teeth, and something beamed in his eyes that made him even more terrifyingly attractive and tempting to Lexa. Kevin climbed closer to her and stood on top of her, on the bed. His eyes glared at her as he smiled amusingly at her. His hands moved closer to her face as he swept off the strands of hair that were blocking her eyes. How do you feel? Are you ready to receive your reward? He whispered into her ears and a cool breeze from his mouth followed, sending tingles down Lexa's body. His words, his closeness, his electric gaze, and the erotic waft of his cool breath against her skin turned Lexa's mind into a mess. She could not even follow the rhythm of her heart anymore. And before she knew it, she nodded. Yes. I'm ready, do as you wish. She knew what was coming, but she didn't know what came over her that made her agree. She knew well that the two of them had awaited this time. She wanted him to start right away, right at this moment. She was scared that she might lose control of herself and end up being the one jumping on him, instead of him jumping on her. Her body's reactions toward him made her realize how dangerous this husband of hers was. He was a man who could make a woman strip themselves down to nothing and throw themselves on him with just a whisper. No, it would not even take a whisper, as his eyes itself was enough to seduce thoroughly. And to her bewilderment and slight indignation, she was not the exemption. She realized that no matter what, she could not stop her body from reacting. And this happens whenever she's beside Kevin. But, promise you would meet the queen tonight and tell her you forgive her, Lexa said, placing her two hands on his bare chest, displaying his muscular abs. Kevin's intense gaze glittered as if what he was seeing and feeling at that moment fascinated him completely to his core. Lexa's tender hands were touching his chest. He was more than excited to continue and had immediately agreed to her words so they could keep going. Is that all? Don't worry, I'll see her before she leaves for the palace. Kevin muttered, half conscious of what he said. He brought his lips towards Lexa and planted a kiss on her forehead. His posture was loose and easy, but Lexa somehow felt that she was being dominated. Bewildered and disoriented, Lexa waited nervously at what he was going to do next. He stared at her and she closed her eyes, not wanting him to see the emotions running through her. Then she felt a soft brush of heat against her upper lip that made her go stiff. Though it was so soft and light she could scarcely feel it, she was feeling so sensitive at the moment that she can't wait for Kevin to devour her whole. But another touch came, this time on her lower lip and then at the sensitive corner of her mouth. He wasn't in a haste, and neither did he stop. His lips came at her again and again in soft, silky caresses as if he were soothing her. Then she felt suddenly lightheaded, and her body was no longer as stiff as a rock. For a short while, Kevin drew back, and an incredibly restrained lust and desire filled his eyes as he stared at her. The next second, his mouth possessed hers with small, persistent kisses, coaxing her lips apart, so softly. So tenderly. Lexa felt as if she were flying up into the clouds. Everything was becoming inexplicable. She found herself opening up to him, giving in to his delicious and passionate kiss. She would have sworn it was sweeter than how they had previously kissed. The instant she parted her lips, he sealed her mouth with his as if he had been waiting for that moment all this time. Lexa shuddered at the sudden intrusion. Her head helplessly tipped back against the window frame as she felt the hammering of her heart and the blood rushing through her veins. Kevin at the same time do not know what came over him. He had become a kissing expert even though it was his first time. He slid his tongue even deeper inside her as though he was exploring the inside of her mouth. And she did not know why or how, but his alluring voice began to echo in her hazy mind. "I'm going to devour your mouth," and slid my tongue inside it. "My tongue and yours will tangle with each other and we won't be able to set them apart. This is stage 1 of my reward to you. For stage 2, I'll devour your body and brush my tongue past your skin, I will finger your secret part till you moan for me." At that moment, Lexa started to feel weak and utterly hot, as if she were suddenly drunk. A happy reading. Chapter 93. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 93. Chapter 93. Obtaining reward for a mere kiss. Lexa gasped shakily for air and he eased back slightly, just enough for her to breathe. His breaths that filled her mouth were now a little warm. But Lexa was too overwhelmed to notice. The light has been switched on so the two could see each other's faces. But while the two kissed, they both had their eyes closed so they could enjoy the deliciousness of the kiss. Kevin's eyes fluttered open as he received the notification from the system. It was so sudden and surprising. "Are you for real? 200 EXP. Kevin gasped in surprise. It was a surprise how a mere kiss granted experience points to me. Prompted to gain more EXP, Kevin continued with the kissing. Lexa thought the kissing was over, but before she could even open her eyes, Kevin's tongue was inside her mouth again. And this time it did not come slow and soft, it was more like a savage incursion and she was caught off guard, unable to offer any obstruction. He began to lick every corner of her mouth and then sucked and licked her tongue like a hungry beast until little moans and groans started escaping from Lexa's throat. He responded with his deep groan and his kisses became even deeper, hungrier. Lexa had never imagined that a kiss could be like this, or even feel this way. At that moment, there was no will, or thought, that could stop her from responding to him. She grabbed hold of Kevin's neck as she returned her kiss. And the moment she did, no matter how inexperienced and disheveled her response was, a deep and low sound of pained desire vibrated deep within Kevin's chest as his hands buried deeper into the foam of the bed. His fists had made a hole appear inside the foam. After the second round kiss, Kevin eased back a little until their lips were barely touching. They spent 2 minutes on this round. Kevin expected the system to notify him, but unfortunately, there was no such thing. He gave up and stared at Lexa's face, still on top of her. the steamy puffs of their breaths mingling as Lexa finally opened her crapulous eyes. But before his stunning face could enlist in her blurry view, Kevin's tongue was buried inside her mouth again. Another intense, fresh, and spine-tingling kiss followed. He continued tasting, sucking, and licking the inside of her mouth as though he could not get enough of her. And as he feasted on her mouth, Lexa could not do anything but feel the bewildering pleasure that was threatening to blot out her consciousness. Something hot and sweet began to swell within her breast and stomach and between her thighs. Another sweet moan escaped from her lips as her trembling hands moved on their own and settled lightly against his naked chest. A sound of satisfaction reverberated in Kevin's throat and his mouth was suddenly latched onto her jaw. He kissed and nipped her there and then slowly traveled down the hollow of her neck, licking her as if he were tasting something divine. And it felt so good Lexa could only writhe in response. The sweet and hot sensation streaking down her breasts had experienced a sudden increase. And when he sucked hard on the sensitive skin of her neck, she quivered, and it was as if there were jolts of electricity zapping her all over her body. A gasp evaded her mouth as she mumbled words in what sounded like half moan and half whimper. Ku. Kev. Wah. Wait, that the queen. Suddenly, he went very still and then pulled away with startling abruptness. He already knew what Lexa was trying to say. He had momentarily forgotten about the promise he made to her. The sudden loss of his solidness and affection had an objection nearly slipping from Lexa's throat. She did not mean for him to stop. She did not want him to stop. She wanted more. She gasped again at her thought, eyes wide with shock as she looked at him. The muscles in Kevin's jaw contracted and tightened at the sight of her expression. But he said nothing, so the only sound that could be heard between them for a while was Lexa's gentle gasps of breaths and his deep and rapid inhalations and exhalations. He closed his eyes and appeared to be struggling with some powerful emotions within himself before straightening and raking his hand through his hair. After a short moment, his jaws relaxed and he spoke softly, his eyes still intense but now controlled and restrained. "All right," he said in a low voice. "I'm going back to the library, wifey. I'll do as I promised." Kevin glanced at the room they were in and saw a plasma TV placed on the wall. "You can watch the television while I'm gone. I'll be back soon, love." And without a warning, his lips crashed against her lips again before he abruptly tore them away. He lifted himself off the ground and walked towards the plasma TV that was placed on the wall. His back was already facing her as he majestically strode towards the TV and switched it on. A drama was displayed instantly and before Lexa realized it. Kevin had disappeared out of view, cutting her view from his drool-worthy body, and she finally found herself able to break free from the earlier paralysis. "Bye." Lexa eventually came to her senses to speak out, but Kevin was far gone and couldn't hear her anymore. Lexa's mind was in a muddle, utterly disoriented and a little confused. She got out of bed to increase the volume of the drama that was played, and then, she began to feel her body again, and she was surprised that she did not crumple to the floor in a boneless heap. After increasing the volume of the TV, she instantly walked back to the bed on her unsteady legs. Upon getting to the edge of the bed, Lexa ran her palms over her still burning face. Her brain finally began to work normally again, and she buried her face against the pillow. Her lips still felt tingly and her nipples too, she began to absent-mindedly touch them. "Oh my!" She gasped upon realizing what she was doing, and she rose abruptly as if startled. She went and grabbed a glass of water from the water pumping machine that was close to the bed and gulped it down. It was a surprise how such a thing was in this room. Whoever built this place had such a good sense. "I built it," the A1 system said to Lexa. "Wow, how did you do that?" "Yeah, I spent a lot of money in building it, and sense too. It's so difficult to tell, you won't be interested anyway," the system said. "I see that you love human lifestyles and cultures. Yeah, I don't think most of them are bad people like my father always says. They are just trying to survive like us." Lexa replied. You know what? How about I play you a drama? You're going to love it. Lexa jumped back into bed again and sat upright to watch the drama that was displayed on the television. Although, on one part of her, she wished everything would be settled peacefully between Kevin and her mother. But she can't help but recall the time she spent with Kevin, the kiss and everything. She blushed as she thought of this. Thanks for reading and for the supports. Chapter 94. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 94. Chapter 94. The coming together of two family members. Kevin used his shadow void skill to appear outside the shadow and landed in front of the library. But before he entered the library, he took a look at his status, which immediately displayed the amount of EXP he had. Not thinking twice about the decision, Kevin immediately accepted to level up, while standing outside the library. The night was cold and the snow was falling more than before. Kevin wondered if the queen might have left, but something was hinting to him that she was still around. He could feel an attraction towards her, perhaps it was because they were of the same blood. But, from the time he had set his eyes on her, he had that feeling of a close relationship with her, even before she removed the veil from her head. Kevin had a lot of things to do for this week and the next few weeks. He wanted to try out the VR game once again. He would say he was so interested in that game and couldn't wait till they resumed classes the next day. Their first day at the academy was ruined, but tomorrow will be the second day they'll be spending in the magical school, so he still has a lot of days left to play the game. Another thing he wanted to do was to go to the black market to meet the merchant who sold the trilling rings to people. If he could obtain the lists of those he sold the rings to, his quest will be 10 times easier than before. But the problem is, he does not know where the black market was. He had no idea how to get there. Perhaps, maybe Lexa or Jerry would know if he asks them. Last but not least was that he needed weapons and armor. The system had told him he could provide him with any weapon he wishes, but Kevin is not a knowledgeable person in terms of weapons. He does not think he had eyes for nice and best weapons, so he'll need an expert who could select the best weapons for him. Or maybe the queen might have someone who could take care of that for him. Now that Kevin thought of it, he realized how lucky he is. He had always thought he was some poor child from a poor family, but now he realized that both of his parents were wealthy fellows. His mother was the queen of a specific world. His father was maybe a rich guy from birth, he do not know. He just knew that the system was created by a friend of his father who was rich, blah blah blah. Your father was a king, a great king. The system said. What? A king? Kevin inquired again to see if he heard the system correctly. Yeah, your father was a king in the human world and you are automatically the crown prince since he had no other female in his life apart from your mother. He would have come to see you when you were a kid, but he was murdered by his family members on your 5th birthday. He didn't know that your mother was pregnant with you, he would have come sooner. If not for the wizard, we wouldn't have known anything. On his last breath, he told me to find you and make you get stronger so you could ascend his throne. That's why I granted you a system and also become an A1 to guide you to the right path. Is that so? Kevin was baffled and felt a little pity for his father. I didn't know that's what happened. That's why I'm telling you not to judge people without hearing them out. But, why was he killed? Why did his family members kill him? Kevin asked in a curious tone. Kevin, I honestly won't lie to you. I can't tell you that at the moment. If you want to know the truth, you must seek it yourself. Make it to the human world at all cost, then you'll be able to find more about your father. Kevin guessed that the system would say that. He has always been trying not to talk to him about his father or his past. It was a surprise how the system even revealed the little he said. As soon as Kevin ended his speech with the A1 system, he received a message from the system. He had long forgotten about the pain in his body. The pain he feels every time he levels up. With the thoughts and discussion he was having with the system, he was able to move without feeling much pain from the evolution. Strength stat. 20 now that he's evolved, it's time to take care of the next matter before going back to Lexa. He walked towards Lena's office. Luckily, the Queen and the Wizard were still in the office. He could hear them talking to each other. Your Majesty, be patient, your son will come back soon. Have faith. How long do I have to wait? The Queen said, tearfully. If the king notices that I'm gone, there will be trouble. You know how possessive he is over me. I had to risk coming to see my son, the only child I ever gave birth to, even though I may get into trouble. Kevin breathed inwardly, and then outwardly before opening the door of Lena's office. As soon as he entered the room, he immediately ran towards the Queen and hugged her. I'm so sorry, Kevin. I'm sorry for abandoning you, for not being there for you. The Queen cried. No, don't say that. I'm the one that should be sorry for not understanding you. I know it wasn't your fault, it was just how things were meant to play out by fate. I forgive you, Mum. This was the first time he would be calling someone Mum and it felt weird. The Queen glared at Kevin's face as she heard that Kevin forgave her. You forgave me? She asked. Yes, I thought about it all and decided to forgive you, my dad, and the Wizard. I wish to let bygone be bygones. Kevin replied. Oh, I'm really proud of you. Thank you, Kevin, for your forgiveness. Ahem. The Wizard cleared his throat. Queen, I think it's time to go. The King. Wait, Wizard, I need to talk with my son about some things before I leave. I don't care that the King does. 1,000 thanks to those unlocking the privileged chapters and to those reading this book. Chapter 95. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 95. Chapter 95. An unfinished business. You don't have to do that. We can talk some other time. There are lots of days apart from today we could spend with each other. Kevin. What a wise human you are. The Queen. No, I'm not a human anymore. I mean, I'm not just a human. I'm a Triling, don't you guys know? Kevin was amused. Of course, we know. I knew you were always special the day you were born. That's why I gave you that magical pendant so it could protect you from the greatest danger that could ever befall you. For real. This pendant seems strange though. Kevin said as he brought the pendant that he kept in his pocket. I had to keep this pendant hidden because a lot of people seem to recognize it. I understand, Kevin. The pendant belongs to your great-grandfather. He gifted it to the last Trilling before he died. The last Trilling is just like you when you were born. He was also human, but he wasn't abandoned the way we abandoned you. And it was all because of the stupid rule the family of the king placed down after denying our family the right to become the next kingship of the kingdom. I had to marry him because it was the only way I could protect my family from being slaves to him. I had to forsake your dad, and you because of that. I'm so sorry, Kevin. I'm a bad mother. Your Majesty, you need to leave now. I can sense danger if we don't leave in the next 2 minutes. The Wizard again. Queen Evie, you can always come here anytime you wish. Kevin is my sister's boyfriend, so he's automatically my in-law. It'll be glad to see you visit again. Lena said. Very well then, young lady. The Queen said to Lena and then turned to Kevin. Grabbing his hands, 2 hands, she planted a kiss on them. Keep the pendant hidden as you have been doing. Don't let anyone take it from you, and tell me if you need anything, Kevin. Money, finances, school items, I'll have them provided for you. Oh, about that. I hope you can help me with these things. Kevin brought out a piece of paper and presented it to the Queen. I wish you could help with that. The Queen glanced at the written words on the paper and smiled. Is that all? She asked. Yeah, that's all for now. If you can help me get them, I'll be grateful. Come on, I'm going to get you the top quality. You're my son, you have to be free with me. I'm going to provide you with everything you need. The queen said. But I'm afraid I'm going to leave you now. I'll come to visit later, by my son. As she said this, the wizard waved his wand and the two instantly disappeared. Kevin heaved a sigh of relief and sat quietly on one of the chairs. That's wonderful, Kevin. Lena exclaimed as she moved closer to him. I never thought you would come back, even though the wizard claimed he could see the future in 10 minutes. Lexa did a good job convincing me so well. Come on, Kevin. Why are you acting this way? I know what I did on our first encounter was wrong, but you don't have to keep reminding me that you're dating my sister. Lena said. I won't do that again now that you're dating my sister. But consider me as a friend and in law to you. Alright, I've heard you. It's getting cold and late, I need to get back to my room before it's too late. Kevin said and then exited Lena's office. Now he started running back to his dorm room, so it will be easier if he leave and return to the shadow void. As soon as he entered the boys' dormitory, he immediately went to bed and covered himself with the provided blanket. Since it was cold, no one would suspect anything. He covered his body from head to toe and then disappeared into the shadow void, inside the room where Lexa was. Hey Kev, you're back. Lexa said excitedly as she told the system to pause the movie. So, how did it go? Did you meet her? Yeah, we reconciled and now we're back together as mother and child, Kevin replied as he squat by the edge of the bed. His hands were used to support the jaws of his mouth as he stared at Lexa. What? Why are you looking at me that way? She asked with a smile. I'm thinking we still have some unfinished business before someone told me to reconcile with my mother. He answered. Lexa smiled amusingly and then brought her face close to Kevin's. Why don't we continue with that business then? I've been waiting for you, Manager Kev. And here I am, to manage every part of your precious body. Kevin grinned while Lexa chuckled. So, are you ready for the second stage? I sure am, Lexa said, and Kevin immediately climbed up the bed and removed his shirt. Inside a huge dressing room, Queen Evelyn found herself appearing with the wizard. She heaved a sigh of relief as she found herself in her room. But then, she started hearing knocks on her door. The wizard bid the queen farewell and disappeared out of sight. Knowing fully who it might be, Evelyn grabbed a long towel and wrapped it around herself. It was long enough to cover her whole body. Who is that? I'm coming. She said as she carefully opened the door. The king appeared before her as she opened the door. Your Highness. She greeted. Queen, what have you been doing since? I sent 3 of my men to come to fetch you, but you didn't open the door or answer them. Tell me, is anything wrong? The king asked. No, Your Highness, I was having a clean up and didn't realize that you have been knocking on my door. Do you want to see me? No, just continue with what you're doing. When you're done, you can come to see me. The king left and the queen immediately shut the door behind. But she had a smirk on her face. My son is alive, he will tear you and your kingdom apart. He will dethrone and punish you and your family for the bad things you did to us. You crazy king. Evelyn scoffed. A happy reading. Chapter 96. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 96 or .18/chapter 96. Touch Me. Lexa had changed into a gown before Kevin arrived. She discovered a wardrobe full of different clothes and seen a nightgown which she instantly put on. Lexa's eyes were glued to Kevin's chest as she looked at him. She was feeling hot as she ran her hands down his chest. Kevin on the other hand couldn't wait to strip her. While Lexa glanced at Kevin, she felt her body screaming for him to do something to her, to relieve that intensely consuming need that she instinctively knew only Kevin would be able to quench and satisfy. The heat that had initially started as a little spark now had consumed her and was unbearable. Touch me, she moaned as her eyes stared pleadingly into his fiery eyes. Touch me, Kevin. Lexa was seated on the edge of the bed while Kevin squatted close to her. Immediately, Lexa rose to her knees while Kevin stilled under her. She was too horny to realize the primitive hunger dancing in his eyes. She couldn't even complete his name because Kevin suddenly moved and grabbed her. His strong arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly as he buried his head against her torso. Lexa felt his forehead cause a frantic dissimilarity to the cool span of her upper body. Lexa, his tone was grave, his eyes were passion-drowsed as he cupped the soft shape of her breast with his one hand. He carefully kneaded, and squeezed it while his mouth kissed her neck. His hands began to explore her body, on and on, she felt both his light and heavy touches alternately everywhere as if he were determined to leave nothing untouched and unexplored. Kevin. Lexa moaned and gasped and strained at his touches and kisses. The strong hands tracing over every nook and cranny of her body aroused unspeakable fiery sensations. Kevin groaned. Completely engulfed in only feeling her, in finally touching her all over. He had fantasized about this day. The day he would get to touch a lady. But he was surprised that the reality is far superior to what he ever could have fantasized. The feel of her soft skin against his, touching her with his very own two hands was simply a divine luxury he wished to savor and drown in for the rest of his life. He wanted to hold her, touch her, kiss her like this forever. Lexa. He uttered her name with a shaky breath, and when Lexa glanced down at him with heavy-lidded eyes, the look on her face sent an extreme thrill zinging through him. It was awakening something primal and vicious inside him, and he was not in the mind of stopping it from emerging. His mouth clasped onto her breasts again, nibbling and licking while his hand traveled determinedly downwards. Lexa's heart was beating violently as she wrapped her arms around Kevin's head. Her erotic moans echoed, and when she felt his hand touch her most secretive part, a shocking jolt of desire made her gasp and yanked on his long black hair. A bewildering heaviness entered her limbs, rendering her muscles into a useless, fluid mass, fully supported by Kevin's strength alone. Even her head felt like it was water-logged and as though she was trying to force her way through quicksand. It was obvious she was fighting a losing battle, one she is willingly surrendering to. The irresistible and extreme hunger made her flesh clench in anticipation. The warm hand of Kevin touching her kept her stimulated while his mouth and other hand paid attention to her breasts. Felt the arousal was too much, it was inexplicable, and yet she wanted more. More. She felt his fingertips wander, delicately searching, stroking her farther deeper, making Lexa choke out a sob. However, it was not one of despair but thick with desire. He played with her little peak next, and then, his long finger probed her entrance. Lexa jerked in surprise, but Kevin efficiently distracted and soothed her. His mouth sucked the taut bud of her breast, and as she gasped, Kevin gently slid his long tapering finger inside her once again, deeper. He was doing everything right like a pro, although only he knows the secret. Back in the forest, in the wizard's hut, he had come across a smut comic book of two protagonists having explicit sex with each other. He managed to read the book to the middle page before it was taken away from him by one of the wizard's disciples. Unfortunately, he didn't recall the name of the comic book. Perhaps he might have searched for it in the library if only he knew the name. The invasion of Kevin's finger inside Lexa made her clench her fists in Kevin's hair again. Kev. Kev. She uttered between her gasps and moans as his finger began to stroke and slide within her with a languid rhythm. Following each scene of the comic book. The fire blazed even hotter over every inch of her skin. Her head fell back as she felt his thumb playing skillfully across her pulsing bundle of nerves. And before she knew it, a second finger was already inserted inside her. She felt a slight burn as he stretched her carefully and tenderly. Her moans started to become a little louder as his fingers reached deeper inside, giving her both slight pain and pleasure. That combination was driving her crazy. His fingers worked in delicate thrusts at first until her inner muscles began to relax and clamp down on his fingers and seemed to be drawing him in deeper. "Oh, Lexa. Just like that, babe," he whispered encouragingly, as he drew back a little. He teased the straining little peak with his thumb, without stopping the gentle thrust of his fingers. Do you want me deeper? Faster, he prompted, and Lexa nodded and moaned. Yes, Kevin. Please. Fast, she panted, and of course, he gladly obeyed. My pleasure, babe. He said, and his fingers thrust faster, deeper without pausing, all the while, maintaining a steady but stimulating pace. Not allowing her a single moment to catch her breath. He did not relent from his delicious strokes and torment until Lexa swallowed a scream and shuddered intensely in his hands. Her knees gave in and she slumped over him, breathing hard as she came down from the heavens where he had momentarily sent her to. How was that? You love it, right? His deep hypnotic voice echoed in her ear. Dazed, Lexa nodded and pulled away. She wiggled and it was Kevin's turn to groan. Lust jolted him and he knew he was going to lose it very soon. He wanted to be inside her so very badly. She was ready for him, more than ready. He could feel it. Gods. He could not take it anymore. A happy reading, guys. Chapter 97. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 97 are .18/chapter 97. F***ck, you can't put your. Before Kevin could move, Lexa suddenly seized his mouth and kissed him. Kevin's eyes went wide, not anticipating an attack. Heavens, that was a surprise attack. The little scrap of self-control he had been clutching onto was about to snap when he suddenly broke the kiss. He then proceeded on kissing her cheeks, down to her neck. A low, masculine growl of satisfaction and desire escaped his throat as his kiss trailed from her jawline to her neck, sounding so hungry as if he wanted to devour her like a highly sought-after delicacy. Lexa. Let's stand by the wall, he groaned with need. He could hardly think straight, and neither could she. His mouth was suddenly on her breast as soon as they got to the wall side, making her gasp. He bit against the clothes covering her until he caught her nipple between his teeth in a light clamp. Lexa's eye flew open, and he caressed her, his breath and tongue now softly licking her peak through her nightgown. All Lexa could do was fidget helplessly at these sensations she was experiencing. She suddenly registered to feel his teeth against her skin before hearing the sounds of ripping garment that reached her dazed consciousness. He did not even give her the chance to react. Because his mouth was already closed over the tip of her breast. He gave a soft grunt of satisfaction while she gasped and squirmed at the foreign and ferocious sensations of his mouth moving sensually over her breast. His tongue licked her nipple and softly tugged and then sucked it. Lexa bit down hard on her lip to keep it from crying out. What he was doing to her was too much that she felt she was going to black out, and yet at the same time. She did not want him to stop. Something unknown was happening to her. Her hands moved to his head, clasping his hair, and pulling at him as her muscles tightened up, her senses opening, reaching, wanting something she could not quite explain. Yes, Lexa. Hold on to me, love, he groaned, his deep voice vibrating against her nipple and his lips moved to the other. The fire of desire between them was burning so wild, it could hardly leave any room for sanity to remain. She clung desperately to him as he kissed and sucked her other nipple, her body shuddering with sustained shivers because of the crawling heat his tongue was sending down to her toes. Kevin, she moaned as her fingers clenched onto more of his hair. Her breathy voice was the pure sound of tortured pleasure that sent shivers down Kevin's arms. He pulled his head away, his breathing hard and hot against her taut and wet nipple. His eyes were dark but seemed to be burning with fire, and then he knelt on one knee and suddenly he was between her parted legs. Lexa's eyes grew wide when he licked the inside of her thighs, moving further inside her gown while his eyes never strayed from her. Overwhelmed and shocked, Lexa's hands that were clenched in his hair shakily pushed at him. No, it's my, she stammered, heart slamming wildly inside her chest, not knowing what to say or do. Are you shy, wifey? He told her as he licked his lips so incredibly sensuously it had shattered whatever hesitation was left in her. Come on, you're going to love it, he added as he snuggled his head deeper between her legs. Shocked with utter embarrassment, Lexa automatically reached down and grabbed Kevin's hair to stop his face from reaching her most secretive part. Her face was as red as a cooked lobster as she looked down at him with wide-opened eyes. Kevin peeked up at her and his eyes glimmered more startlingly than usual. A hint of a devious yet relaxed and slumberous smile graced the corners of his mouth. Without averting his eyes from hers, he licked her inner thigh, causing Lexa to tremble and gasp again. Her hands on his head grasped onto his hair tighter and he took advantage of her disorientation, moving further toward his goal. His breath was hot as he trailed his searing tongue along her soft skin. "Don't worry, I'll make you feel good, wifey," he said huskily, sounding as though he was soothing her with his mouth and tongue. "Open your legs for me, love," he coaxed, and she did not know how she ended up doing so when he was not even holding her legs with his hands. She could feel him smiling against her intimate place when she withdrew her shaking hand from his head. "Yeah, this is it," he purred and he pressed his erotic mouth against her sex. "Oh, God," she jolted, instantly flooded with mortification. "No wait. Not there." She uttered a hoarse protest and tried to move but she found herself without any strength. "Kevin, you can't." He took a glance at her. "I know it's your first time doing this. It's also my first time. Calm down, I'll go easy with you." "That's not what I mean. It's dirty down there. Fuck, you can't put your..." "Come on Lexa," he smiled, the glimmers in his eyes became even brighter, fiercer. "It doesn't matter and by the way, it's not dirty. It's pretty and you're also pretty." He glared wickedly at her. Lexa sobbed as his mouth kissed her sex again. She could do nothing but keep her eyes tightly closed at the feel of his wicked mouth and tongue lashing against her. What was this? She had no idea something like this was. Oh, God. Every lick of his tongue sent enticing heat zipping right down to her toes, making her bite down on her lips hard to keep herself from crying out in ecstasy. But the moment his tongue brushed over a certain sweet spot, she cannot help but just quiver and release a moan from her throat. Thanks for reading and supporting. Chapter 98. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 98 R.18/Chapter 98. Touch it wifey, Lexa, I want to devour you whole. I want to suck every inch of your body. Kevin moaned breathlessly. No, not that. Lexa spread her legs wider and brought Kevin's head closer to her sex. Here, it's aching for your mouth. Don't worry wifey, I'll ease your pain, Kevin said as he started sucking Lexa's vagina and his tongue suddenly brushed past a sweet spot, her clitoris. She quivered and moaned loudly. Yes Kevin, keep going, I love it. She felt him groan against her and then he suckled the taut butt of her vagina, making her twist and grab his raven-black hair. He did not budge despite her tight hold on his hair, and she could not move an inch away. At first, he licked and sucked her slowly but as moments ticked by, his pace continued to increase. She could feel how wet she was now and to her mortification, her shame seemed to have long left her as her body arched and gasped, helplessly widening her thighs for him. Her body language was literally asking him for more. His warm and skillful tongue danced across her pulsing flesh until Lexa's heartbeats seemed to drum in rhythm against her head. Fuck Lexa. You are so responsive, came his husky murmur and she forced herself to look down. Her vision was blurry as their gazes met. I love you Lexandra, he added and as though something snapped within him, he ate her again, but this time, his movements were hungrier and wilder. Heat blazed over every pore of her skin and she knew her face was contorted and flushed with pleasure. He did not relent until her toes curled and there was a strange and wicked tension that coiled deep within her belly. She did not even realize that her leg was now hooked over on his strong shoulder. Kevin slowed and gazed up at her once again, making sure to look at her face in astonishment. He flashed that devilish smile and he licked her while maintaining eye contact. The sight of his erotic gaze as he did that and everything else sent strong ripples throughout her body. His mouth nudged past her folds and something strong and wet and hot probed the entrance of her body. She jerked in surprise. Oh, God. Wait. Kevin, she squirmed, tugging at his hair again, but he stayed with her. His strong tongue began to move, compellingly and demandingly. He did not pause despite her moans. He stroked and tormented her twitching flesh, not allowing her even a single moment to catch her breath. He feasted on her without reservation, and she could only surrender to the excruciating pleasure he was subjecting her to. This pleasure. This wildness. It was too much for her. And all she could say was his name. Kevin. Ah, yes. Yes. She curled her fingers in his dark hair, desperately pulling on him now as her flesh began to twitch under his torments. His tongue continued bathing her sex with warm strokes until the sensation drove her higher and higher. Something euphoric flooded her and at last, she shuddered in rapture and squirmed as she was unable to control her limbs. Kevin, however, did not pull away. Instead, he stayed right where he was and continued feasting on her as if he were adamant on drawing out every last ripple of gratification he could get coming from her. After a few moments, Kevin stopped and stood on his feet, his hands were placed on the wall. "Lexa, I want you to touch me," he whispered huskily close to her ears. "Ha!" Lexa said as she fluttered her eyes open. She touched his chest but Kevin sighed in disapproval. "No, touch me," Kevin said again and Lexa could only blink. She has been touching him before now, where else does he want her to touch? Her lips opened and then closed, her disbelieving eyes fixed on his taut face and to the gray fire in his bright eyes that seemed like a lure more potent than any potion existed. "Touch you where?" She swallowed. He bit his lower lip and released it very slowly. He retracted one hand that was against the wall, without averting his gaze from hers, never blinking. His hand moved towards his trousers, to the pulsing and hot bulge that had been insistently prodding at her. "Here, wifey." He released a pleasurable moan. Lexa felt her gaze involuntarily drift down and then was glued on his very evident erection and her heart skipped a beat as she swallowed hard. She had to use all her willpower to drag her gaze away from that spot and look back into his eyes. With cheeks aflame and when she saw the look on his face and the intense glimmer in his bright eyes, Lexa, determined in her heart, moved her hand slowly towards his bulge. Her movement was filled with hesitation that Kevin had to hold his breath and told himself to wait patiently when her hand was taking too long to reach his eager dick. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like he would get a heart attack. She was excruciatingly slow that it took all of Kevin's self-control and will not to grab her hand and guide it over him where he truly needed it. As he watched her hand inching closer, the anticipation became quite torturous. He battled within himself whether he should speak out and urge her to hurry up. But his next thought was that he might just be too impatient and that was why he felt her movement was so damned slower than it actually was. Patience, Kevin. He told himself. And at last, his long suffering was finally rewarded. Her dainty hand finally reached its destination. Kevin bit his lip at the butterfly touch of her hand. Lexa looked both shocked and fascinated the moment she felt how hard and hot it was. Despite the hesitation and nervousness, she couldn't help but feel wonder and curiosity at the same time. Time for some erotic play. Heck, I think I also need this tonight. Chapter 99. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 99 are .18/chapter 99. It's so long. Hesitantly, Lexa molded her fingers over the length of him and a pain-like groan echoed in her ear. She jerked in surprise and whipped her gaze up to Kevin's face as she snatched her hand back. Her eyes widened, looking worried and apologetic. "I'm sorry," she exclaimed, anxious that she had done something wrong in her ignorance in matters such as these. "Did I hurt you?" she instantly added, flushing with embarrassment. Kevin pulled away, and the corner of his lips deepened with a wickedly sensuous smile. "No, love," he said and paused. "Well, I'm in pain but it's the pleasurable kind of pain." You know what I'm talking about, right? He locked his gaze with hers, not allowing her gaze to drift away, even if he understood her bashfulness. He wanted to savor and imprint into his mind every single response she brings forth. She nodded, flushing hard, thinking that it might be something like the unbearable feeling she had experienced when Kevin kissed her down there. Touch me again, Lexa. He whispered as his eyes held hers. And when Lexa looked down again, she nearly gasped at the sight of his hard length already freed from the tight confines of his trousers. Since when did he manage to do this? I guess it's your first time seeing one. Kevin asked, and Lexa nodded in a daze, unable to take her eyes off his mighty hardness. It's my first time seeing a female's too. He revealed. Heavens, it's so long. Lexa could not help but gulp. Gods. It was so much bigger and longer in real life than she had thought and heard of. Touch it, wifey. He whispered as he coaxed her. Curiosity stirred powerfully inside her, and to Kevin's surprise and immense pleasure, she reached out again, this time with less hesitation and more speed compared to her earlier actions. She eased her hand along the hardness shyly, and Kevin nearly purred in pleasure. He seemed to revel in her every innocent and curious touch as he nuzzled his head into the nook of her neck. Yes, Lexa. Like that. Yes. Curve your fingers around it, he instructed. His fiery breath fanned against her skin, all the while letting out a faint masculine groan. When Lexa did as he said and gripped his heavy shaft with her petite cool hands, the contrast in temperature caused Kevin to suck in a quick breath. Yes, babe. You're doing it right. Stroke it. Up and down. Let me feel your hands touching that dick. Kevin instructed as if he had been doing this before now. He imagined the scene of the comic book in his head and was following each step carefully. Like this, she managed to speak as she glided her hand over him. The ripples of his soft hair against her bare neck and shoulder were raising gooseflesh over her skin. He pulled his head away to look at her, and their eyes met. His eyes held a wicked glitter. Go faster. Please, he panted at her between his roughened breaths. Understanding what he wanted her to do, Lexa increased her pace and his eyes closed. His long lashes trembled slightly against his cheek. Kevin could not even comprehend how good he was feeling at this moment. It was as if she opened a floodgate of desire hiding inside him, and now he was drowning in nothing but pleasure. A pleasure he thought was more powerful than anything he had ever experienced before. Lexa, the deep and guttural way he uttered her name almost sounded like a tortured cry, his lips parting from the force of his sharp breaths. I love you, Kevin, Lexa said as she moved her mouth toward his lips and kissed him. All the while, she still had her hands touching his hard dick. A low sound vibrated from deep within his chest, and his shaft jerked violently in a series of spasms as he spent himself in her hand. Lexa was completely overwhelmed as Kevin lowered his scorching forehead to rest on her shoulder. His breaths came out hissing violently between his clenched teeth. God, he let out a shaky breath after a while longer before finally pulling away. He stared at her still dazed and flushed face, looking as if he were beholding an extraordinary kind creature in the whole of creation. Hastily, he covered her mouth with his and kissed her wildly, all the while digging his hands into her long hair and tangling his fingers through those purple locks. They kissed for what felt so long until Lexa felt him tugging her gown off her shoulders, and then the ripping sound reached her ears, shocking her. She pulled back from the kiss and looked incredulously at Kevin. He just ripped a perfectly gorgeous gown down the middle into two pieces. Seeing her shocked expression, Kevin gave her a sheepish grin before planting soothing kisses all over her face as he whispered. I'm sorry. I am not usually this barbaric, my love. I'm just so impatient when it comes to you. Especially right now, he explained as patiently as he could, and Lexa immediately realized that he seemed a little worried he had scared her. She caught his face and smiled. I don't mind, she said, you can tear them away all you want. She chuckled at that and added, I found the gown in the wardrobe over there. There are enough gowns we could use, so I'm saying you could tear them whenever you wish. Her words and light-hearted statement made Kevin freeze for a moment. Then he cursed under his breath before jumping on her to possess her mouth again. He tore the rest of her clothes and undergarments to shreds, and his intensity somehow made Lexa feel even more thrilled and worked up with unspeakable anticipation. He pulled her up slightly, his hand on her back as he removed all her clothes, including the singlet that were proving to be a hindrance, and threw them off the bed. His lips dragged downwards from her lips to her throat. His large palm moved to her head, and he gently grabbed a handful of her hair, pulling her head back to have greater access to her neck. Lexa moaned at the feel of his mouth and tongue hungrily kissing her skin. Her hand reached out and brushed over the back of his neck, feeling his silky smooth bare skin and his rigid muscles. He groaned at her touch, and suddenly, he pulled away and stood by the bed. Should I give a bonus chapter today? Then shower me with gifts and golden tickets. If you do well, I may drop 2 extra chaps. Chapter 100. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 100 are .18/chapter 100. Finally inside her. Bonus chapter for the power stones and golden tickets given by Grangel. Lexa was surprised as she saw Kevin stood by the bed. She dazedly bolstered herself up slightly, using her elbows to lift her upper body. Her mouth opened, but the words did not come out as the sight that welcomed her eyes took all her power speech away. Kevin was swiftly removing his trousers, letting the fabrics drop unceremoniously to the floor. His gleaming eyes were locked on her the whole time he was undressing. When his dick was fully bared to her gaze, Lexa's eyes glittered with shock, and chuckled nervously. She stared at the long hard dick that was pointing toward her. Just by mere looking at it, made her mouth keep on watering with anticipation. Lexa's face felt hot, no, not just her face. Her entire body too. She fell in love with this guy who had totally infected her with his charm. The anticipation just kept on rising the longer she stared at him. And she bit her lips in embarrassment when she felt the strong urge to just jump on him and run her fingers all over his captivating body. Seeing the desire and undeniable desire in Lexa's eyes as she looked at him, Kevin's heart protruded in utter satisfaction and gratification. To be able to satisfy his wife in this way was a great accomplishment. Now that the two were naked, Kevin walked closer to Lexa and started sucking her breast while with his other free hand, he caressed her breast. While doing this, he held Lexa's hands above her head and started licking her body. But the pleasure was rising quickly in Lexa, and her vagina began to ache. She wanted him to touch her there too. But he was so focused on her breasts, and his other hand was pinning her hands above her head. The most agonizing thing was that he seemed to be acting and moving more slowly than usual. And it was driving her crazy. Touch me, Kevin, please. She moaned tearfully. Kevin stopped the sucking and smiled at Lexa, a smile that nearly made her heart stop. His gaze sensuously glided from her face to every curve of her body as he looked at her, seeming to adore the very sight of her. Due to her hands being clasped above her head, Lexa's breasts were lifted and completely exposed. Her pink nipples were tense and wet and erotic. Kevin growled softly as he stared at the buds that were peeking due to his incitement as well as the cool air. He coaxed and explored her body until she was utterly helpless and so soaking wet. When Kevin slipped his fingers inside her, it slid easily into her, and Lexa's insides eagerly clasped down on it. Her responsiveness aroused an even more pleasing smile on Kevin's lips. He slid another finger, spreading her, as his thumb playfully teased her taut bud and all her sensitive spots. He already knew where to find her sweet spots, and it would be impossible for him to ever forget. Please. Kevin, she said between her moans, I can't wait anymore. Kevin proceeded on carrying her to the bed and made her lay naked while facing the roof. His hand had eventually let go of her wrists and they traveled determinately down to her knees. She felt his strong and powerful hands firmly grasp her knees and pushed her leg open further before settling himself comfortably between her widespread thighs. Lexa could only languidly lift her head slightly and peek at him kneeling there in anticipation, eyes glittering intensely as he stared at her. "Oh Lexa, my love. I'm finally going to taste you." His voice was hot and unsteady. Kevin's heartbeat raced uncontrollably. He was so hot. He had never felt this hot in his entire life. "My God!" he groaned. Everything felt so surreal. "Lexa," he uttered her name as his hard dick settled at the entrance of her wet vagina. "I'm putting it in. Tell me if it hurts, okay?" Lexa nodded, swallowing. She lifted her weakened hands to touch his chest, but Kevin caught them, and he pinned them above her head again. Kevin had to murmur to himself to be patient and gentle despite the primal need that was overpowering him. Entwining her fingers with his, Kevin slowly and gently pushed himself into her wet vagina entrance. The moment he slid inside her, everything just got lost, all that he had been telling himself and preparing in his mind was gone, just like that, and before he knew it, he was pushing strongly inside her, causing Lexa to flinch, and cry out in pain. He totally forgot about giving her time to adjust to his size, the discomfort that would sure be there as it was her first time being stretched out so much, and of course, the breaking of her maidenhead. He eased himself a little bit to see if Lexa was alright. "I need to keep it calm, she's a virgin. She may be feeling a lot of pain. I have to take it easy with her," he said patiently to himself, groaning as he forced his whole being to freeze and stay utterly still. The sound of her whimpering cries cooled his raging blood and woke him up from the haze of pleasure that had swallowed him whole. And the next thing he knew, he found himself torn between the regret of hurting her and the deadly pleasure of finally being able to be inside her. "Are you all right, Lexa?" he asked, his jaw clenching as he stared down at her with unfocused gleaming eyes. He knew it was stupid of him in asking her this question as it was obvious from her cries that she was not okay. However, he did not know what else to say to her. His taut face and the look in his eyes were enough for Lexa to tell that he was restraining and holding himself back quite harshly. As much as she would like to assure him with words, all she could do right then was just give him a small nod. The burn and pain caused by his sudden and forceful invasion made her unable to utter nothing but a weak moan. Thanks for reading. Want one more bonus chapter? Support me now with your gifts and golden tickets.